I need new ideas. All of us who are in the business of distributing news and information need new ideas. Now, tomorrow, next week, next month, and so on. That's why we're here, to explore the best and latest ideas about distributing news and information at the epicenter of technological, economic, social, and political disruption. As someone whose career began amid clattering typewriters and the rumble of the presses, I am especially aware of how far we have come at the velocity of electricity from a comfortable presumption that editor-aggregated content distributed on a geographical basis held an intrinsic, indestructible value. Now, a hyperactive, hyper-competitive market reveals the true value of information in an endlessly instantaneous churn based on the choices of consumers. This is both fair and a representation of a highly efficient marketplace of ideas. At the same time, as we all know, the market can be brutally punishing. While some content is highly profitable, other content costs more to produce than the revenue it generates. This is more than a hit or miss proposition. To cite but one example, under the existing model, local news is often unsustainable. Even in New York, media capital of the world, city with a storied tradition of pugnacious newspaper, television, and radio journalism, the local press is weakening to a degree that demands radical action. The Daily News, Times, Wall Street Journal, New York One, and DNA Info, for example, have all reduced metropolitan New York coverage. The retreat has been substantial enough that no major media organization any longer staffs the Bronx or Queens courthouses. Economically driven, the withering of local news illustrates the overwhelmingly constant demand for innovation by media organizations in creating, presenting, and distributing content of all kinds so as to successfully build and keep audiences. So here we are to learn about innovation, including, notably, collaborative innovation from some of the most forward-looking folks in journalism. I look forward to absorbing their ideas, as I'm sure you do too. Eric?
Thank you, Arthur. I think you've framed the issue that we're going to talk to quite well, and why thinking about journalism in the age of collaboration and technology is so important in a world that's more complicated, more globalized, more connected by technology. These are some of the issues that we'll talk about. And of course, we need to talk about that word that's on everybody's mind, the five-letter word that starts with T, and it's TRU. We're talking about trust, and we're talking about truth. So with that, let me introduce very quickly our panelists so that we can hear from them. On the far end, Rob Moore, who's the head of the news for the Daily News, and Rob recently oversaw the Pulitzer Prize-winning work that the Daily News did on the nuisance abatement laws in New York City. Next, Tina Rosenberg, who is also a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. She's obviously a highly respected journalist and the co-founder of Solutions Journalism Network, and we'll talk about what she and they are doing for collaboration. Ben Smith, who's the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed, and previously worked at both Politico and the Daily News. Jeanne Straus, who's the president and publisher of Straus News, which publishes 17 local weekly newspapers and associated websites in the New York area. And then lastly, to my right, Eric Umasky, who works at ProPublica and has overseen two Pulitzer Prize-winning projects, one of which was the same project with the Daily News, and that was a terrific collaboration and got us to think about, in the newsroom, the importance of collaboration and talking about it today. So when I run panels, I like to use the Queen's rules. This is not the Queen of England, but Queen's New York, which means talk quickly, interrupt each other, say what you want, elbow each other, interrupt, but, as Winston Churchill has said, given that I'm the moderator, don't interrupt me when I'm interrupting. So, no, let's start off the panel, and let me talk to Ben, or ask Ben. You are in the midst of, the technology. You have moved from being in print journalism to the world of technology. What do you see as the difference? And how has that affected what you're doing on a day-to-day basis? By the way, Ben wanted me to ambush him, but this is a question that I've given to him.
The difference, the sort of small, easily described one. I guess my background is as a reporter who and I think was lucky enough to kind of be around when the tools of blogging were coming about in the early 2000s, but blogging meant at that time like opinion writing, and who actually was lucky enough at the news with my editor then was Dean Chang, to basically be told well, you can take this tool where you're publishing in reverse chronological order all the time with typos and break news with it and report and do the things reporters do in this kind of incremental way. And I actually think one of the things that we're seeing now is after a decade where a lot of publishers saw the internet as a trick, where particularly with SEO, if you could bring in some technical experts to sprinkle technical fairy dust on your content, not by the way that that stuff isn't real and doesn't matter and good technology isn't important, because it all is, but that you would just but basically it was something to be outsourced to technologists. And I think if you sort of think about who's on this panel and what they do, these are all of our publications are in many ways very rooted on the web, but the thing that you find that breaks through on the web are massive scoops, huge stories, things people want to talk about, which is not new.
So Rob, from the print world, give us a sense how you now cover local news, given technology and the ability to print on the web 24 hours a day.
Okay. Well, I'm going to correct you first, since my editor's sitting there, but we don't live in the print world anymore. Everything we do is digital first.
I stand corrected too, so thank you.
All right. So my perspective, I've been at the Daily News for 14 years now, and walking through the newsroom 14 years ago, it was a battle just to find a seat. Right now, it's a little different. There's economic realities. We've had downsizing, layoffs, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a challenge to have such a reduction of resources, but still produce, fine journalism. And as Arthur said earlier, one of the solutions to those challenges, I think, has been some collaboration. And obviously, if it works, it can work. Because last month we were on the same stage accepting the Public Service Pulitzer Prize. But it has taken a while for us to kind of get there. You mentioned the word trust. There were times when people will come to us and pitch an idea, and it won't fit, or we can't really vouch for their reporting. But I think the more that we work with other news organizations, it still allows us to do really fine journalism.
Tell me about your organization, which is based on collaboration, and how you think about that in today's world of journalism.
Sure. Well, I am co-founder of an NGO. We're about 4 years old, and it came out of a column that my co-founder and I write in another newspaper in New York that isn't the Daily News. And what we do is we work with news organizations. The organization, the Solutions Journalism Network, isn't a destination site, but we work with news organizations to help them do solutions journalism, which we define as serious reporting, rigorous reporting about how people are trying to solve problems. And the idea behind it is that there's been unbelievable innovation in journalism in the past 15, 20 years. The entire field as we all know, completely different. But 90% of that, if not more, has been in the field of platform and delivery, not in the field of content. And journalists, we continue to produce a product that is largely focused on telling people about problems. And that's not the whole story, because for every widely shared problem, there's people who are trying to solve it, and reporting on what they're doing is an important part of the story. And more than that, it's a part of the story that readers want. I mean, a lot of the reasons that people turn off the news is that it's painful to consume, and then we wonder why people won't pay for it. So we work with news organizations across the country to help them do these kinds of stories. And when we started, we had trouble finding solution stories enough to fit 3 a week that we would send out to our mailing list. And now, we're drowning. It's just overwhelming, the reception that it's gotten. I think people, because of the crises in journalism, people are receptive to doing some things that are a little bit different.
Right. So Eric, from your perspective, and ProPublica does something similar. You work with news organizations. You often do your own stories. I mean, give us a sense of how you're looking at the news and some of the collaborative projects that you've worked on quite successfully.
Sure. So I can give a little bit of an arc of our history with collaborations themselves. When ProPublica started in 2008, it was a very different world. I don't know, maybe Ben can tell me whether Twitter existed. It was close to not. But social media wasn't really a thing at the time, right? And we were, as Tina said, not a delivery platform, right? We needed, in order to get our stories out, we needed to partner with other news organizations. And so that a lot of the partnerships that we thought of were distribution. And we still do that. It's still a very frequent, we partner with all sorts of publications. But the world of possibilities now with collaboration has really opened up. And in particular, if we want to, as Ben was saying, it is whether a story of yours breaks through is based on how good of a story it is, whether it's a big scoop, is it revelatory, and that can hold no matter whether you're a big website or a small website, right? It's the story that circles around. And what that means for us in the new reality, and we have a significant following now on various social platforms, is that we can think more broadly about collaborations, and that sometimes instead of a distribution partnership, what it can amount to is a reporting partnership. I'll just give one very quick example, and it can happen. Typically you think of partnerships as everybody sitting down, and it takes weeks. Or in the case with the Daily News, it was great, and we spent 8 months or whatever it was working together. Just another quick example of a very different kind of thing was about 2 months ago, the White House put out on Friday afternoon at about 6 o'clock, because that's a perfect time for transparency in America. They said, we are going to release, because we are the greatest and most transparent administration in history, we are going to release the financial disclosure forms of 128 White House officials who are all required to fill financial forms. But there's a catch, and in fact there were 2 catches. One, we're not going to post them on the web as previous administrations have done. We are going to require you to fill out a web form with each individual person's name. So you have to fill out a form for each person's name. Second trick, we are not going to tell you the names of the White House officials. Right? I called it was like Battleship Transparency Game, right? So that's really effing annoying, and how should we deal with that? And what is the right way to deal with that? So one of my colleagues had the idea, well, screw this, why don't we organize with other news organizations, collaborate to put all the names in a Google spreadsheet, collectively request them, so it'll take, you know, a fourth as much time. And by the way, as a complete, like, F you to the administration, we are going to put them in a Google Drive. It's actually as a public service is what I meant to say. We are going to put them in a Google Drive so that everybody can see these forms. So I called up a colleague or friends at the Washington Post, at the New York Times, and we spoke to people at the AP. And very quickly, within minutes, we had other news organizations joining with us because the technology is now available. We had a Google spreadsheet, right? I mean, imagine before Google Docs and Google spreadsheets, how exactly do you do this? It would have been a million email threads and a whole hassle. We did this thing within minutes. No special tools, no nothing. And we got, you know, 100 names. We got details. We got readers looking into it. We were posting it live on Twitter, right? That was a collaboration that took about 45 minutes. And yet, was a whole revelatory thing, and you know, it can be a new way of doing things.
That is a great story, Eric. Thank you for sharing that. And I knew references to that 5-letter word starting with T would come up on this panel. So, Jeanne, to you, we heard Tina talk about innovation in journalism, but really that's been more about platform and delivery. You have a platform. Do you think more about your platform, your distribution, your delivery, or do you spend a lot of time thinking about the journalism?
All of it.
Right.
I think in terms of collaboration, that's an incredibly exciting story. We had recently, there are 700 independent newspaper owners in New York State. It's the largest group of independently owned publications in the country. And we're about to launch the next week or two a thing called News to Share, where we're all going to share each other's stories and make it available to each other and try and work through this collaboration thing, which I really think is an important piece. So it's going to be all local publishers sharing news across the state.
So that's really interesting as well. So it seems that some of these collaborations, in your case, these are not formal relationships. These are developing in the situation versus more formalized. Can you talk a little bit about that? Or?
Sure. I mean, you know, as I've, like I've described it before, you know, the word partnership can encompass many, many things. And each of our partnership is a delicate little flower that it's its own thing. And so, you know, we do certainly have, and I think actually the Daily News collaboration was very much a formal partnership. We, you know, had a meeting and sat down beforehand and worked out the details, and you know, there were lots of details to work out and a big commitment on the part of both organizations. But I do think now the internet affords you the opportunity to do lightweight, as you say, opportunistic, informal collaborations. You know, one thing we had done is we once, a few years ago, put out a database where you could look up your doctor and see if your doctor was getting pharmaceutical payments, right, or gifts or whatever. You can all look it up, Dollars for Docs. Lots of your doctors are on there. You know, which drug companies and which amounts for what and so forth. Well, we did a national story, but of course there are a million local stories that can be told in that. Now, we could have done is contact a million places and say you should, you know, do this and so forth, but you know, we are a few people and there are only so many places. So we did a thing called a reporting recipe, right, where we said, are you interested in reporting on this? Here are the steps to take. We actually set up a conference call, and you know, was that a formal partnership? Not really, but at the end of the day, and this is a, you know, a nice position we're in, what we want to do is to get the issue and the story that we are highlighting, whether we're writing it or somebody else, attention. Our goal ultimately is impact, right? And by working informally and even indirectly with other news organizations can be a great avenue for them.
Ben, I want to come back to sort of the innovation in journalism versus this idea that most of the innovation has been in platform and delivery. But you know, you at BuzzFeed have done a lot of innovative things in journalism. You know, talk about some of the things that you have been able to do in journalism, but also, has the platform and the ability to create tools on the fly, has that helped, what you've been doing and helped to, ensure some of the success that you've had?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I just realized on the topic of partnerships, I would also say like it's like not necessarily in everybody's nature to be it's a very competitive business, and a lot of the people in this business are extremely competitive. And this all just prompted me. I don't know if you remember this, Rob, but we once worked together, and definitely at some point we were screaming at each other about like who exactly was getting credit for what. But it all worked out. But I think that's definitely like a major feature of the partnership universe as well. Like you guys had wanted to include human beings in the story. Anyway, I think, tech, I mean, we definitely don't draw sort of a clear line between tech and journalism. There are both but I do think they're sort of both kind of simple tools that resolve really tough journalistic questions that has been, and it's nice to be in a place where people are thinking about that all the time. The easiest example actually is with kind of disturbing graphic photos that you'll often at terrorist incidents or crime scenes be making these newsroom calls about, do you publish this photo? And like there's a very strong argument to publish it and a very strong argument not to. And we were having those arguments as everybody else was, and somebody said, oh, could we put an overlay over it that blurs it and allows people to choose? And that would like just sort of neatly resolve, in many cases, you actually give the reader the choice. And I always sort of like that just because it's like an actual technical solution to a real editorial problem. I think for us the biggest, I don't even know if you think of this as technical or what this is, but I think something that's really core to us that is really different from how at least I used to work is this sense that a huge part of any story now, or a lot of stories, is the social conversation and the propaganda and the lies and the false versions of the story that are floating around, particularly in a breaking news situation. I mean, breaking news has always been like a huge mess, and in the newsroom, but when I was at the news, like either be a car accident or a political scandal, and in the first couple hours you have no idea what's going on. You're sending reporters to the wrong door, and you have the wrong name, and you have the right one too, and you're trying to figure out which is which, and are they related to each other, and you're sending people to the wrong house. But then by the end of the day, by the time print, a lot of that has sorted out, and you can print a story that you're very confident in. But now your audience has a window into that first minute and sees you scrambling to try to figure out what the hell is going on and says, Jesus Christ, these people are idiots. And of course, like, we have always been idiots. But now it's visible. And so, like, I think for us a big challenge, but also opportunity, has been kind of reckoning with that transparency and trying to say very clearly, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's how we know it, here is something that you're going to hear a million places, and here's why it's false, or we're not sure whether it's true or false, but here is what we know about this claim, and that the sort of information itself and the ecosystem have become sort of inseparable from the story. It is a real, and we do things kind of formally to, like, how, I think the Times followed us in this, but just this, what we know, what we don't know, what's true, what's false kind of formats, but also this is sort of what took us into winding up spending a lot of time last year breaking stories about was briefly called fake news, before that term was used for everything you don't like. And I think that sense that the internet ecosystem around a story is itself part of the story is something we think about a lot.
Yeah, I think the idea and the concept of competition today is a really interesting, change in how journalism is moving. And Tina, you look at it from the opposite standpoint. You're really helping companies sort of cooperate. They're sort of getting the same story. Are they competing?
We were trying to cooperate.
We normally work with one news organization at a time and help them work on a project that they want to do and add maybe a solutions component to an investigative series, et cetera. But now we're moving more into collaborations. And in part, it's because we're starting to work more and more with small local news organizations. Like, for example, we have a group in New Mexico and another one in Colorado of tiny news organizations. And we're talking about like 3-person, used to be 15-person, now they're 3-person news organizations. And they'll choose together a topic, like, for example, healthcare in rural areas. And they'll all do their own reporting on the problem in their area, but they'll collaborate on doing a story on maybe what another city across the state has done that's working, and they'll all publish it. And we have a collaborative in Philadelphia of 16 news organizations who are all working on solution stories on the issue of prisoner reentry, which in Philadelphia is huge. And they're all not only working together, but they're publishing each other's stories. And believe me, it was a lift to try and get the Inquirer to sign on publishing stories of small news organizations. But it's working.
That's
it's
great.
working.
Rob, I want to come back to breaking news. As you're thinking through the day and you're thinking about the important local stories, how are you spending your time thinking about, okay, this is breaking, we got to get it up on the web, versus sitting back and having some context in terms of providing sort of more thoroughness for this story for your readers?
I mean, my immediate thought is to get 3 or 4 paragraphs up on the web. It's to then, if it's a big story, then to push it out on social media, because it's very important to claim ownership in the Twitter sphere, or just to own the story, and it invites clicks if you have the story up first. I mean, this is the most competitive part of what we do every day. Breaking news is kind of our bread and butter. We do it very well. And we're head-to-head with the enemy paper that I don't ever say out loud. But, they're a worthy competitor, and it's a race to beat them and get it up first. I don't think about context and layers and the other things. The first thing is to get it up quickly and as accurately as humanly possible. Then we can go back into the story, make changes, and then you can think about context, if there needs to be other voices in it, sidebars, presentation. As I said before, it's a digital product that happens to have a newspaper, and that's kind of how you have to think about it now.
Jeanne, tell us about how you think about serving your reader versus providing more context versus more up to date.
A couple things I wanted to say, just on the collaboration thing. The one thing we haven't talked about, which ProPublica is doing so well, is the citizen contribution to what they're reporting. So what I think you didn't talk about at the White House story was that you asked also for White House employees to contact you guys, right, to help tell the stories.
We asked people, yes, for lots of things. Yep.
And that's been really important to us too, which is, one of the advantages of the technology is you can tell sort of a little piece of the story, what you already know, and then ask people in the community to help you unwrap the rest of the story. And that's been very effective and very useful for us, particularly where we have, a large share of market voice there. And that's been very useful.
So, I mean, let's follow up on that theme, and I'll open it up to the panel. I mean, in one sense, technology is helping journalism. You're allowing for the immediacy of it. At the same time, it's hurting journalism and not allowing the context. You're bringing in citizens that may or may not have the same sourcing. Is that a concern to anyone on the panel?
I have the opposite.
You have to do both. I mean, you have to do both. You have to do both the breaking news and have citizens help you, real life people help you unwrap the story, and then you have to be able to step back. And the advantage of publishing once a week is you do have that second opportunity to sit back and give it context and give it a different story and do some, talk to a lot more sources than you do if you're trying to get out first.
Ben?
So I would say, I think actually it's a great time to be a reporter in this context, but it's a really confusing time to be a reader, and particularly because it's changing so fast. And a lot of these things that I think for us are now sort of obvious, you get the breaking story up, and then you work out the context, and you can do both, and kind of need to do both. I think there's this sort of profusion of voices and sources and brands, and I think for the audience is understandably going to take a while to figure out what's what, I think I think it's really fun to be a journalist right now and use all these tools. But I think it's very disorienting to consume.
Eric, you seem to be nodding your head.
Well, I was just going to say that for us, as Jeanne was saying, we are quite aggressive in terms of contributing, reaching out to communities and readers to help us with our reporting. That may be as straightforward as leak to us. Here are all the ways that you can leak to us. And we put little tags at the end of stories, quite simple, which says, do you have more information about the Labor Department, if we were writing about the Labor Department or whatever it might be. But we also are much more ambitious about it and think in scale in terms of reaching out to readers who might not have particular expertise or inside knowledge, but have personal experiences with something. We did a story about the U.S. has a about 5x the rate of maternal mortality than other developed countries. We did a big story looking at why that was. Before we published the story, we published a very detailed questionnaire reaching out to mothers who may have had near-death experiences or family members who may have had a mother die during childbirth and have had about 3,000 responses. Those are not things that we are simply, getting it and then it goes on to the web. That's not what happens. So in other words, in terms of the question of cooperation and confidence in that, well, that's because we're not publishing it, right? We're using it as a source for our reporting. And indeed, it's a remarkable repository for reporting and leads, and we're using it in different ways and so forth. But I think getting contributions from people affected by stories or insiders and so forth is an incredibly valuable thing and a different issue than whether or not readers can trust that information.
But in your case, you have the luxury of sitting back, analyzing it, providing context. Rob, you don't have that same luxury.
No, not at all.
And does that compromise the integrity of journalism, of not being able to, the push to put it out so quickly, to use technology? Does that then worry and create compromises in terms of the journalism?
In general, if you get information and you have to vet it just like anything else. If you had an hour or two to vet it, you would apply kind of the same rules immediately. Like there's you see Twitter explode with there's a car up on a sidewalk in Times Square. You have some very basic information, and then you see people tweeting, well, it was an SUV, well, it was red, well, it was green, there are 10 people dead. And it's the same vetting process where you would reach out to your best sources and see what you could confirm. And that kind of happens within minutes. If you don't get a firm number, it's several people this, and as general as you can, but still as quickly as you can. And once we post that, then we can go back and try and iron out the details. We try very, very, very hard in that immediate fog of a breaking news story, obviously, to still get it right.
But the need to get it out so quickly, in a sense, and Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, are we dumbing down journalism in a need to get to, clicks to get to eyeballs very quickly before we provide more context? You have the luxury of, spending more time of thinking through some of the solutions that are required in some of the journalism.
Solution stories aren't really a breaking news thing.
Yep.
They're really enterprise. They're a second day or third day follow-up to breaking news, but it's not a breaking news. It's not a tool you would use to do breaking news. But I want to talk about something that Eric said, where he said this is not the same thing as trust. I disagree. I think this is exactly what you're talking about with bringing your readers in is in fact trust building. I think I meant that. Okay, yes. Good. We have this misconception as journalists that trust is the same. People will trust us if we're accurate. And I don't think that's true. I mean, I think people trust us because they think they have their back, or we're on their side, or we care about them. They don't care what you know unless they know what you care. And this kind of transparency, showing your work, bringing readers in, asking people for their stories, I think it's hugely trust building, I think.
Ben, from your perspective?
That's definitely that's entirely how we think about trust, because obviously nobody trusts BuzzFeed News because their grandfather read BuzzFeed News. and so I think when we think about trust, it is very much about being totally transparent, having a lot we're basically not expecting people to take our word for it. We want people to be able to see what we're reporting on. And I think the stories where you really build trust are those stories where you actually kind of touch people's lives around an institution that, whether it's a university or a hospital or something that directly touches them and they know it's true, rather than you're not building a lot of trust, I don't think, covering Donald Trump one way or the other, just because the waters are so toxic.
I just want to give one example. One of our partners is the Chattanooga Times Free Press, we helped them do a series called The Poverty Puzzle, and it was a 7-part series, all local reporting, each one about how some institution or a group of people in the city was trying to do something about poverty and social mobility and economic mobility. A church, a school, social service agency, very nuanced, lots of characters, and of course, none of these people were successful. I mean, they were all had some successes, but a lot of failures. So this story, first of all, it was a Pulitzer finalist in explanatory reporting, so it was a really great piece of journalism. But more important, according to the people who worked on it, was it completely changed the relationship of the newspaper and the city. The paper won a United Way Community Service Award for the first time ever. The journalist who did most of the stories, she said, I used to, when I would tell people in Chattanooga that I was a journalist, the usual response would be, I hope you're not one of those journalists, implications. And now she could say, oh, I did the poverty puzzle. And people said to me, I love that. It showed you guys really care about the city. You weren't just doing gotcha journalism. You really cared about what's going on here and how people were trying to solve that problem. And the most amazing thing was, she said, even the Facebook comments were civil on that story, which is unheard of.
Please jump in, Jeanne.
Can I jump on and follow up on what Tina's saying? We're talking a lot about breaking news, but following up on what Tina is saying, I think we have incredible measurement myopia. I think that Peter Drucker, the great management guru, said if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And what you manage, you do watch. And I think, chasing page views and chasing uniques is a problem. We look very carefully at our sites about repeat visitors. When we report the new worldwide headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, which moved from Brooklyn to one of our towns in Warwick, New York, when we report or do video about anything connected to that new worldwide headquarters, our sites light up. But if you look closely, they light up from Jakarta, Indonesia. And we don't think in the long run that that's going to do much for the local hospital or the gym. And so we're worrying about repeat visitors, where they're coming from, and doing long-form journalism. So time spent on site is something we look carefully at.
So one of the things that Arthur brought up in his remarks was, and I don't want to misquote, but this idea about need ideas, need input. Isn't it still all about great storytelling, or is it more? Jeanne, you're shaking your head.
I think it is all about great storytelling if we're going to use different metrics. I think it's not about great storytelling if we're going to be talking about uniques. I think that you really, and the video of the cat that does 3 somersaults is for a long time going to do better than the story about the Arctic ice cap that's melting, which is an amazing, amazing video, but probably didn't get as much as the cat does.
Well, I think there's an expert on cats on the panel, and also an expert about publishing.
Our investigation, yes.
Also about publishing the Trump dossier. So, Ben, maybe you want to address that.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about that. You can get obsessed with that you can get obsessed with measurements, and I think part of it is, sure, time on site is valuable. I mean, all of them are valuable, but but any one can mislead you also. And I think and some of the things that we're talking about in terms of how hard a story hits are things that you sort of come to know and is hard to measure. And ultimately, did this? I mean, I think I always think of the Daily News as being the sort of master of this specific thing. And when I got my job, I dragged Art out to lunch to try to figure out how to imitate this. But you pick some city agency that is fucking up and just hit them so hard repeatedly that they have ultimately they just have to fold under your sustained assault. And I don't know exactly what the metric is for that, but you clearly sort of know it when you see it. And we've
gotten a couple of those recently.
Yeah, you put the word shame on the wood, and it's just so but that's not. I'm not sure there's a metric that you use for that. Sorry, I lost the question.
No.
Cat videos. Oh, I mean, I think these things are not basically intention. People like cute animals. In Blade Runner, actually, there's a whole thing about how the way you can tell that someone is what do they call them? Not androids. A replicant. When they're a replicant, if there's this thing where if they have no empathy for cute animals, that's how they turn a turtle over. And I mean, if you're not a sociopath or a replicant, you probably like cat videos. That's not intention with caring about your community or news or journalism. And I think that's just basically this sort of weird false dichotomy that. I mean, I don't think people I think companies like ABC, NBC do entertainment, do news. Nobody gets confused that the show that comes after the evening news is fictional and entertaining. I think I don't really see it as like a real tension, but also, right, you don't expect the news to have the same ratings as The Voice, and you shouldn't consider the news a failure if it didn't rate that high. And making sure that you're like realistic about, you know, what the right goal is and that you're hitting the right people is important.
Eric, you want to jump in?
The other thing I would say is that, you know, when you say, is it about great storytelling, it's also a question of how do you define a story, right? And what do you mean by storytelling, which is that, again, the palette upon which we can paint, the canvas upon which we can paint, is much larger than it used to be, right? You can tell great stories now, and we do, and proudly so, that are long-form text stories, right? They can also come in all sorts of other forms. The sort of human impulse of storytelling does not necessarily mean a 10,000-word text story, right? And so that you know, it just can take many forms, and so long as it's powerful, if it's revelatory, you know, that can really resonate.
I want to make sure, by the way, that everybody in the audience starts to think about questions, and I want to open this up a little bit earlier for questions. So please start to think through some of your questions. I think we have an important topic, and I really want to get input from the audience. You know, the reason why I asked that question is, and Arthur and I have talked about this a number of times, you know, the important investigative work, which, you know, we feel is part of the public responsibility of a newspaper, and to keep an eye on, you know, on local government, for example. Sadly, much of that doesn't pay if you think about it on the web, and yet, so you're constantly trying to balance that with other stories, or not necessarily cat stories, but other entertainment stories that may just be eyeball grabs on the internet, or thinking about a lot of breaking news so that you can sort of bring people to your site. So I think you have a reaction to that. You know.
Yeah, a lot of the news organizations that we work with are starting to raise funds for stories like that. They collaborate. For example, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, which is one of our long-term partners, they raise money from universities. They have a investigative reporter who's a fellow at Marquette every year and works on a year-long series. A lot of people are raising money from city foundations, local foundations. The San Jose, no, not the. That's an interesting model also. But in New Mexico, the Santa Fe New Mexican has spun off their investigative team as a nonprofit, so they can raise funds. Although you can accept donations if you're a for-profit also. But I think this is kind of the future for expensive stories like investigations.
That is in fact our model, right? We have disaggregated the. You know, we are not obviously advertiser-based, and as one of my colleagues like to say, we've actually figured out the best way to monetize journalism, and that is to get people to donate for it. Right. Which usually wealthy people, but increasingly lots of people.
But which is the ultimate, you know, citizen input on doing that. Ben?
Certainly we do very important and thoughtful stories. We are watchdogs of city agencies. We've been very effective in getting reforms with the nuisance abatement story, with holding ACS's feet to the fire, same with NYCHA, and so we do these important stories too that have a different type of impact, and it's not all, you know, our entire mission is not just chasing the.
Ben, did he say what you were going to say?
Yeah, partly, but I think part of it is that, like, the reason that when the Daily News does a series on, you know, on these nuisance abatements, that it has so much power is partly because the Daily News has a massive circulation, and that circulation comes in part from the fact that people care about steering investigative reporting and City Hall reporting, in part because people love sports, and like in large part, and in part because people read the entertainment section, in part because The Wood is really funny a lot of days, and like certainly at BuzzFeed, like the reason that the NBC Evening News hits so hard is because NBC has a schedule of entertainment all day, or used to hit, you know, that brings people in. The reason that like mass media, and we certainly see ourselves in that category, can force government to do things is because 1 million people read the story. And the reason ProPublica is trying to get things published in the Daily News is because that reach is really important. And so I think it's not So I don't think you can totally, the idea that there's sort of an ideal world where, I'll just.
That's me.
What song is it?
Yeah, that there's an ideal world where journalism is sort of like delivered in these kind of pristine packages separate from anything fun, is a world where very few people read this stuff. And I think like the power of real mass media that's reaching many, many, many people who are mostly there for entertainment because people mostly consume entertainment, and that you can, and that's a powerful channel for real journalism is like pretty core and important.
Well, let's turn it to the hard-hitting questions from the audience group.
My question was, so a lot of people want to kind of skim the news on their phone. They want to skim the summary, skim the headlines, in general, skim very summarized news. How much summarization is over simplification? You know, at what point is simplification just dumbing it down?
I'm happy to, well, take a quick stab. So one thing we've actually done an increasing amount of is doing stories that are only on social, right? So we will take a 5,000 word investigation and do some offshoot of it that only exists on Twitter, or there is no story, and we will only do it on Twitter because it's too fast moving and we don't want to spend the time to write a story. I don't think of that stuff as dumbing down. It is the challenge of journalists to synthesize information, to provide the context and be accurate in the space you got. And if you can't hack it in, you know, whatever that space is, then you got to figure it out. I mean, Twitter is one of the most concise vehicles that we have for delivery. And the truth is, you can actually tell quite nuanced stories and with a lot of context that is not dumbed down. We embrace social media and we don't dumb it down. That's just the job.
I would second that. I think it's the same thing as writing a great lead and having a great nut graph, and why is anybody going to keep going? Same challenge we've always had.
Yeah, right. I would say, with the exception of a fantastic photo, that headline is really your entry into the story, and you got to knock it out of the park in just a few words.
Right. Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Rogers. I'm a reporter at Vice. I'm curious about this idea of collaboration. It seems like as we have fewer and fewer resources, collaboration is going to become more important. But how do you avoid diluting that trust when you're collaborating with multiple different newsrooms? You know, there's so much sort of insidious distrust of journalism in general. And, you know, if you partner with the quote-unquote wrong newsroom, then you might lose this group of readers and that group of readers. And how do you maintain that trust while all working together?
Okay.
All yours.
I mean, honestly, what I think about that is, at the end of the day, you know, this is like, look at the fucking story, basically, right? Is the story good? Are the facts good? If you know, X or Y journalism organization helped us to bring that to life, and that would be the only reason we would collaborate with them, then whatever, right? It's at the end of the day, and it is not as if I have done market studies to validate this, right? But I think it's the journalism that matters, right? So let us work with the people in which we can bring the best possible stories, the most revelatory information, and I think things settle out from there. That's what we consider when we work with folks.
I mean, I would just say that the ground is moving under us all the time, and it's different now than it was 3 years ago. And I think collaboration is urgent and incredibly important on the national scene, on the local scene. And we sort of have to get over the suspicions about each other and do the good work that needs to be done.
I think I sympathize more with your question than these guys. You know, in one hand, like I do think, like Eric says, that like this isn't fundamentally a branding exercise, and you know, if the story's true, it doesn't really matter where it came from. But that said, the kind of collaboration that I find that really satisfying right now is in the context of very intense competition. I mean, if you look at the national security beat right now, you have I mean, what's nice is that if you are a beat reporter on the FBI right now, and one of your competitors breaks a story, your job is not to, over the course of the next 8 hours, to match that story, which is what it used to be. It's to advance it whenever you can. And so there's this kind of like it's not exactly collaboration because they hate each other and are furious when the other person gets a story, but there is this kind of like building of a collective body of knowledge, and but part of that is also going really hard after what seems to be a false report and knocking it down. But that is like, there is sort of a sense that you're working toward a common purpose that was always kind of true in reporting, but is now so visible.
Tina, do you want to add?
No.
So I just want one thing in terms of when the Daily News and ProPublica collaborated on the nuisance laws and won the Pulitzer. It was also a case where the work that ProPublica did in terms of doing a lot of the data management, in terms of the spreadsheets, providing those resources were something that were not available at the Daily News, that we would not have been able to do it. And so, in some cases, you've just got to find the partners that have the resources and develop that trust to make it happen, because otherwise there's some stories that just would not happen.
Could I ask a follow-up, though, because I'm curious? Like, it seems to me that for Tina and Eric, you guys sometimes give a kind of stamp of approval to organizations by collaborating with them. So, like, what if Breitbart called you up and wanted to do an investigation with you? Like, or Mother Joe? It's not in parallel, but you must draw the line somewhere, right? And aren't you... Like, how do you draw the line of who you're allowed to collaborate with?
Honestly, I can actually show you the list I have in the back of the blacklisted news organization. No, it's not true. It's not true.
No, but I mean, it should be, right?
So right, but again, I would think, we. Yes, there is some line, but I think if you think of it as is X institutions. Well, I can actually think of a very specific example where we decided not to collaborate with somebody. This might be helpful. It was not an institution, but somebody came to us and had a lead for a story. That was an interesting story. And it turned out that person, it was actually about the North Dakota pipeline. And the reporter who had information also happened to be effectively an activist in it, right? It wasn't a question of the veracity of the information that we questioned. This is your point. But we decided that that person is taking a side in a story, and we simply can't do that, right? That they are an active participant in the story.
I thought your side on the nuisance law story was pretty clear.
No. We had you totally mistaken. We have no opinion on the nuisance law. They were. It was not necessarily an evidence-based thing, right? If you are an activist, the question is in what way if you're coming to a conclusion based on evidence, that's one thing, and doing it through the mechanism of journalism. If you're doing it in an activist format, which is perfectly legitimate, it's just another form. But I would also say that generally speaking, we look to say, is the news organization providing reliable information? If it's not providing reliable information, that's going to knock a bunch of people out who, because of maybe they're more politically oriented or whatever, would knock them out. It's, at the end of the day, we are an evidence-based journalism organization, like most journalism organizations are. But that is our foundational thing. We're about evidence. So the question is the news organization about evidence? And that's the real question that we ask ourselves.
Thank you.
Next.
Hi, I'm Daniel Garcia. I have a question kind of inspired by Ben. I watched your CEO give a keynote a few months ago, and he talked about BuzzFeed News and how he was really proud of it. And then I was really actually surprised to hear about BuzzFeed News and all the cool things you've done, because I mostly only know it for Disney princess quizzes. So then my question really is, how do you position BuzzFeed News as something separate, or how does the BuzzFeed brand affect the news that you cover?
Well, the basic strategy is to have our CEO give speeches to people and hope that they notice it that way. I think for instance, this is sort of self-absorbed to talk about, but this is obviously kind of our challenge, which is on one hand, we came in with this huge asset, which was this massive brand that many people, particularly younger people, are familiar with and love, but also think it's kind of LOL that we would be doing news. They were like, at least like that is new to them, and and if you had said like certainly like when I started in 2012, do you trust BuzzFeed? That would have been like a incomprehensible question. Like, I don't know, I like it, and so I mean I think that for us that sort of sense of like how you build people's trust. I don't think it's like really a branding exercise. It's sort of a long game. You do try to do good stories that break through and kind of touch people, and that's that. I hope you'll see some of them. I don't really think there's a, but then I guess the other piece of it is we definitely do think about, you can't get too cute with like sort of pandering to your micro-targeted demographic audience, but certainly we think about the things that a big chunk of the BuzzFeed audience cares about, and our reporting is sort of skewed toward education, technology, sexual assault on campus. I mean, some of these stories that really hit home for a big chunk of our audience.
Cool. Thank you.
Next.
My name is Jason. I'm a daily news reporter. When you're working on these collaborations and conflicts inevitably arise about whose story it is, whose style it's going to follow, which side is going to win if there's a major disagreement that comes up, what are some of the ways that you've found for resolving those things?
I know this is going to surprise you, but there were a couple wrinkles along the way when we were working with ProPublica, but I mean, we're all very professional. We had some discussions and we just ironed it out. It's the same thing if we had some in-house issue. It would be the same. There was a good level of respect between both newsrooms, and we just worked it out. In the end, I think there were versions published on each site. Some of the writing that you saw on the Daily News is more kind of our style. We introduce people and photos, where theirs was slightly different. Lots of inclusion high of documents and data, but based on the same reporting. And we just had a discussion and we agreed, we shook hands, and it's all good.
I mean, lots of people ask us, and new partners sometimes say, well, where's the contract? What are we going to sign for the partnership? And the answer to that is, if you want to sign something, we can sign something. But typically, it's simply about trust and respect. I mean, it's like any relationship, right? Sometimes you need to, walk around the block or whatever it is. But no, but at the end of the day, everybody has the same general goal, right? And it is to do good, impactful journalism and meaningful journalism. And it really just is about being, respectable professionals. I mean, it's just as simple as that. There's no magic or specific game plan beyond that.
I think I was listening to your boss, Steve Engelberg, talk about this a couple weeks ago, and I think he said that of about 75 different news organizations that you've collaborated with, about 4 of them had serious problems.
Yeah.
And the others were pretty smooth.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Diane. This is a general question, and I'm not sure if I need to point it more specifically, but I'll just blurt it out. What's the most important story about intellectual property today that you know of?
Texas? About intellectual property?
Yeah.
You meaning the legal rights of the story itself,
That
or
could be one type of intellectual property.
meaning who owns the intellectual property of the story, or a story about intellectual property?
A story about intellectual property. What is one of the most important stories that you know of today?
I'm not sure how much that is an issue that gets covered, I mean, certainly by us, honestly.
Access to medicines, I would say.
Yeah.
Access to medicine.
Hi there, I'm Amber. Eric gave us a great example of a collaboration for a public service, as you so diplomatically put it. What would be your most successful collaboration for something in the philanthropic sector, and what did you learn from that collaboration, and what do you think could be improved on that?
Philanthropic meaning where we coordinated with other news organizations to raise money?
It could be a fundraiser, sure, anything for good, rather.
Everything you do is for good, right?
What's that? Yeah, we
We
do
all
good with
do.
journalism, yeah.
Right. Charities, nonprofits, etc.
I mean, our own, we're a journalism organization. Our collaboration is with other journalism organizations. We accept money only to us. But I don't know if others have.
Maybe something with Charity Buzz, something along those lines.
I think one of the challenges actually for I think ProPublica and I think a bunch of other people is they get a lot of funding from nonprofits, from foundations.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not doing a lot of reporting about that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say one exception. Well,
You said Queens, so.
We did a very long series over a number of years about the Red Cross, which is a nonprofit organization in which we detailed significant troubles over a long period of time. Anybody is welcome to look up Red Cross ProPublica.
But not a fund.
A different example, which I love, is that the Washington Post is now working with local newspapers in cities in mid-America to offer free. If you subscribe to the Journal Sentinel, you get a free subscription to the Washington Post, and I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'm actually sorry. I'm not sure this is really the question, but on the question of I do think that I love the model of rich people in New York or in some city or in the country funding journalism. Also, obviously, it makes you a little less likely to go after their interests. I do think in New York, the thing I think about a lot is the extent to which the real estate industry just owns the city, is at the heart of virtually every corruption story. And so if you're doing whatever nonprofit kind of journalism grows up here is going to have to find its money somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there's certain.
This is something that's never been faced by advertising-funded publications.
No, but that's a challenge.
Wherever you're getting your money, it's a challenge.
It's a
Yeah,
challenge.
and it's certainly been an increasing trend that you've seen with local newspapers where much of the funding has come from philanthropic efforts, from charities. I mean, Philadelphia is a perfect case study of that happening. I mean, this wasn't a collaboration, but certainly many news organizations talked about Donald Trump's charity and all the issues with that. But
he's not a donor to ProPublica.
And I also am obliged to say here that Microsoft's journalism tools are superb and superior to. Is that good?
Thank you for the product placement advertising. So let's take two more questions, please.
Hi there, I'm Laura. I work at Hearst Digital Media in the magazine division. Ben, I thought you said something that was really quite poignant, actually. You said it's a fantastic time to be a journalist, but it's a really challenging time to be a reader. So in the spirit of collaboration and trust, how do you think that collaboration in journalism really solves some of the challenges that a lot of readers face today?
I'm not sure that in the broad sense that it does. I do think that one sort of maybe relatively narrow area that it is important to collaborate on is conventions. And I think actually this is truer in some ways on the advertising side than it's most obvious to me on the advertising side where, there's the rise of these new forms of advertising, sponsored content, all that we're very deeply involved in. And part of the issue for readers is, how do you know it's an ad, right? And in a newspaper, you know it's an ad because the font is a little different and has a black line around the edge if it's on the op-ed page of the New York Times and it's an ad. Those conventions are so obvious that you never even think about them, or it's got a box around it and it's a picture. I mean, there's all this stuff that in a newspaper is just totally obvious what an ad is. That's true of display ads on the web. But other kinds of advertising, for a while, Google had a yellow overlay over sponsored search results, and so we put a yellow overlay over ours. Thought that's the convention. Then Google stopped doing it, so we stopped doing it. And I think they're starting to develop a kind of common set of standards around just a kind of visual language for what is what on the internet, and I do think that's actually really important.
Right, thank you. And the last question. Pressure's on.
Great, thanks. I'm Vince. I'm co-founder at Ursa. My question is directed to the entire panel. Aside from Google Spreadsheets, could you share your experience working with digital tools specifically for collaboration, whether external or internal?
Spreadsheet.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things is that we've done lots of collaborations that doesn't actually require fancy tools. right? So Google Spreadsheet, Google Documents. We use a thing called Screen Door, which is a way, I don't know if happen to be folks are familiar with it. It is simply a way to get responses from readers or to fill out a questionnaire that could be readers. We actually use it for our job ads now, that anybody can log in, who we give access to, and you can sort and you can write comments. But it's nothing particularly fancy, and it's not particularly expensive. At the end of the day, Oh, also I should say Slack. One thing I will say is Slack, well, because we did a big project around election monitoring, ultimately, in the run-up to the election. It was called Electionland. There were about 1,000 journalists around the country who were contributing to this, and there was no newsroom, per se. It was basically 1 million different chat rooms in Slack. So, that's...
And in your case, you used that new technology called the telephone. You actually called
yes,
people and talked to them.
We called people too, telephonically. You use telephones, yeah.
Slack is a very important tool in the newsroom, particularly to help.
Or whatever Microsoft's version of Slack is.
Yeah.
Slack is, for breaking news, particularly global breaking news, you got people all over the place. Slack's incredibly valuable. I would say, also like the great Slack hack of 2019 is going to be a nightmare for everybody. And I think like Signal is actually, we use Signal a lot, and it's like a more bare bones tool, but you can have groups in it, and it's much more secure, and that's very valuable.
Anything else? So I just want to, first of all, let you know that the music you heard was at no additional cost. I want to thank Ben for helping me moderate the panel. And let's get a round of applause for everybody for all their great work. So thank you.